Hey, Tanat, can you hear us? I think it's should be able to hear us. It's not. Watch. We're gonna have to over just spot thing. Huh? Yeah. Oh, you read this? Sorry. I thought you were saying. You don't know what. Oh, yeah. He's not saying anything. How nice. Received not I can. Whenever I'm out of the way. I think you're doing that for 37 speak line. Bro, welcome. Thank you guys all for coming. My name is Sean Paroya, and so along with Jacob, Awais, we're part of Paroya Aslam Capital, and so we're basically second-year MBA students. We've gone through this. We're actually deep in this searching process ourselves, and so we just wanted to kind of put this event together and give MBA students an opportunity to see other things out there in the landscape and other opportunities that you can possibly explore. It's a really compelling opportunity of what we're seeing out there in their landscape, and so just wanted to present some of this information. Hopefully you guys learn some useful things from this presentation. Now, for those of you guys that don't know, first and foremost, what is ETA? Really, ETA is a business strategy where individuals buy and run existing businesses instead of starting new ones. And I think the key components of this to highlight is that you're buying existing businesses. And so this does two things. First and foremost, it reduces the risk versus a startup. And then secondly, you're saving a lot of time because these are existing businesses that have existed for decades and decades. And so it provides a really compelling opportunity for you to go in there and mitigate some of those risks for yourselves. Now, why ETA? 4 reasons that we think are kind of crucial, but first and foremost, it is a fast track to leadership. So if you have ambitions of being a CEO, of being an entrepreneur, this is a really compelling way to kind of get in there and bypass some of that corporate structure. Number 2, like I mentioned earlier, you are buying existing businesses with stable cash flows, and so tremendous amount of lower risk compared to startups. And number 3, and this is a really compelling one, is that it's accelerated wealth creation. And so how that kind of works is that, say I want to buy dental practices, right? You can go and buy number 1, and then you can use that to build credit and buy number 2, and so on and so forth, and start to really scale up your operations. Same thing in other avenues as well. So say you want to buy a factory, you can buy factory number 1, and then so on and so forth, create synergies along with other factories that align with your thesis. And so it really does accelerate that wealth creation process. And I think there's a great way to highlight this. So a Stanford study showed that the average IRR returns for 10 years on the ETA is 33%. And so that is a massive difference relative to what you see in the public markets. Now, the last thing is that there's a favorable funding landscape. So in the United States, there is multiple avenues. So whether that's SBA lenders, PE firms, friends, families, there's a lot of capital in this country to go around. And so that creates a real way to kind of get some of that financing and tap into some of these small businesses that are for sale. The steps of ETA, the first and foremost, you kind of have to go in and decide how you want to go about doing it, right? Do you want to do it self-financing it yourself? Do you want to do a kind of traditional route? And so that's where that fund formation comes into play. And then secondly, it's research markets and form thesis. You're going to go in and you're going to look at businesses and markets that sound compelling to you. For us, as we went through our search process, we kind of went into our kind of circle of competency, which Buffett talks about. And so ours is kind of healthcare. And so we're looking at, that sounds like a compelling landscape to be in and an attractive market to us. and we know a lot about that space. So that's kind of what we started focusing on. And then after that, once you kind of decide what markets you're looking at, what sounds interesting to you, you can go in and begin your search process. And so you'll basically, this is where, a lot of your energy will go into. You'll basically be spending a lot of time and energy in that process. And once you have narrowed down a deal, you'll go in and raise capital. And so that capital can come from a multitude of ways: banks, private equity firms, self-financing, and so on and so forth. And then after that, you'll go out and you'll acquire and operate that business. Now, depending on your holding strategy, you can either hold that business or you can exit it via a private equity firm. Now, why now? Now, this is a really crucial, I think, key component, and I think this is a really great time to enter the ETA landscape. Now, the reason is because 51% of owners in the United States that own small businesses are over the age of 55. And so this is essentially dubbed the silver tsunami. Right now is probably not a better time than to do ETA than it's ever been in this country's history. And so you can really go out there and find some really attractive businesses. There's about 112,000 companies with enterprise value of over $1 trillion for sale. And so within the next 10 years, you have that management needs to transition into younger generation, and which is where all of us kind of come in and are able to acquire these businesses. The types of search, like I mentioned earlier, the searching process is probably that's the most crucial process where you will dedicate most of your time and resources. And now there's two ways you can approach this. First is, via brokerage. And so, for example, for dental practices, we've kind of gone out and spoken to brokers and they'll feed us deals. But the other is that you can call up dentists yourself. And oftentimes, actually, if you cast wide enough of a net, you'll actually source some of the best deals that way by cutting out the brokerage firm and just calling up the dentist yourself. And so those are the two ways you can go about that search process. Now, what market to consider? There's a multitude of desirable factors as you decide what market to consider, but really you want to go into industries that are fragmented, that are not consolidated, and that show a growth over time. You don't want to go into those that are stagnant or having reduction and contractions. And so for us in the dental landscape, it's growing. It's got a CAGR of 7%. It's only 20% consolidated, and so that's kind of the one that we chose, and that you can do this across anything. We've talked to searchers that have done music lessons. We've talked to some that have done daycare centers, and so you can really go into any market that is fragmented and that it's growing. And then along with that, you want to target markets that are relatively early in the industry life cycle and healthy, sustainable profit margins over time. So you're looking at greater than 15%, 20% EBITDA margins. What businesses to look at in terms of what to own. Ideally, you want something with high margins, recurring revenue, stable cash flows, and so you also want something with maybe predictable, low cyclicality. So, for example, something that would be cyclical might be the hotel industry. You're going to see ups and over the summer and then drops during the winter. And so, those are some of the things to be aware of as you go out there. Is avoid some of those businesses. And then you also want to be aware of the fact that when you actually buy these businesses, that you're going to operate them. And so you need to have a good management team. You need to have a clear path to how you're going to take that business and grow it over time. Now that in the ETA process, as you go about it and you determine what businesses you want and it meets your thesis, the last thing is the sources of funds. Now there's kind of four main sources of funds. There's other additional ones, but the four main ones that we want to touch on is getting a seller's note, and so where the seller does part of the financing of the deal, and so you can get a 20%, 30% seller's note, and so it's essentially negotiable between you and the seller, and then you pay him. And the interest is negotiable, but you can pay him interest over time, and so then the seller is financing part of that acquisition, and that takes off a little bit of risk as you on the buyer side. Now, the second is LPs, and this is LPs that can come from friends, families, fund of funds, and so all these individuals can be limited partners in your ETA acquisition. And then third, you can also yourself be the GP and inject cash yourself into the acquisition. Now, the fourth, and this is one that a lot of ETAs, especially a lot of searchers, go through, and this is one that Tanatsa himself has gone through, and he'll kind of chime in on some of these components, but it's where you basically go through a bank, the SBA loan route, and typically you have to do a 10% down payment, and it's up to $5 million, and even within that, you can get about $2 million, so it's a $7 million in total, where you can get an extension and some technicalities, and so there's a lot of really favorable terms there as well, because it's lower interest rates, and it's backed by the government as well, and so that's a really compelling way that many searchers go about financing their deal.
Quick question.
Yeah, we can. A question at the end.
Okay, that's fine.
Yeah. Now, resources, multitude of resources, the ones that Jacob, myself, Awais, and Sharif that we've kind of liked as we've gone through this process is Search Funder. You will see all kinds of businesses for sale on there. I mean, we've seen like semiconductor businesses. So we've seen, roofing businesses. And so there's a multitude of businesses on there for sale, and you can kind of pitch ideas to individuals back and forth and see what their thought process is. Number two is Biz Buy Sell. That's just a listing company. You can reach out to brokers on there and see businesses that might look attractive to you. Now, number three is iBiz. Now, iBiz does an extensive amount of industry research and report on various businesses, and so a bunch of different markets. I mean, there's literally even reports on like fishing equipment market research. So it does very thorough niche specific research on industries that might seem attractive to you. And then a book that we like is Buy Then and Build, and so that it gives you a pretty comprehensive overview of as you go through the acquisition process. Yeah, thank you so much, and that's the end of the presentation. Now, do we have any questions?
Yeah, my question was, you had a slide that talked about only looking to businesses that are early in the business cycle. I was hoping you could kind of expand upon that and kind of talk about what that means. Slide right before the last. Relatively early in industry life cycle. I was hoping you could talk about what that means.
Yeah, so in terms of the relatively early in the industry life cycle, you're basically looking at businesses that have not had an extensive amount of consolidation that's occurred over time, and so it's still early as far as the fragmentation of the market goes. And so one way to highlight this is maybe like the pharmacy industry. So the pharmacy industry, we see CVS, Walgreens, and all that, but there was a time where that life cycle of that is now very mature, and so it's been heavily consolidated. And so there was a time where majority of pharmacies were privately owned, and so you want to hit industries that are kind of earlier in that stage and not so mature and highly consolidated.
Gotcha. Thank you.
I think just to add on,
And
also,
Jacob can.
so if it's relatively early industry, there's prospects of growth, right? The whole idea is you want a business that is going to grow and that you're going to consolidate. If you go to the mature industries, there's really little room for you to grow.
Oh, growth. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. Any other questions?
I know how would the scale of the business affect your target search, and is there a safe range or common range of the scale in terms of revenue or market cap?
Is there, I'm sorry, could you repeat that one more time?
Scale.
Scale. How would this?
Big is the business you are looking
Yeah,
at?
so in terms of the size of the business, it really depends on, the limiting factor is really the financing of it. And so, if you're going the SBA route, right, so it's $5 million. And so is the maximum kind of loan, and it's another 2 million on top of that I was kind of touching base on. And so that kind of can end up being a limiting factor for you as well. Another aspect could be that obviously as you scale and go for larger businesses, there's risk attributed to that, because if I'm buying a $4 or $5 million business versus a $1 million business, and then the $4 or $5 million business has a downturn, you can take a larger hit. But if you kind of want to do a smaller, like a $1 or $2 million acquisition, you can kind of have a proof of concept and then go back to the SBA and then do it and get additional funding for another 3 million, and then buy another $2 million business, and then so on and so forth. And so it depends on what your strategy is and how you want to go about it. Some individuals go larger, some individuals go smaller. It depends on your risk appetite. But in terms of the financing from just the SBA, you can, per guarantor, it's $5 million. And so, if you have a co-founder with you, that's 5 million for you and 5 million for them. So that's actually 10 million, unless you guys sign collectively on a terms. But that's kind of how it works in terms of that.
So it depends on the individual's risk appetite and how many partners are working on one company. Can I say that?
And I can actually, Tanatsa, if you want to, he's closed the business, and so if he can chime in as well and share his insights.
Could I get the question again? I don't think I quite got the question. Can you guys hear me clearly?
Yeah.
Okay. So could I get
My question is for a search fund or for people who is interested in ETA. What's the size of business the individual is usually looking at?
So the question was
got it. So the size of the business.
Size of the business, yeah.
Well, it's going to depend, right? The few things that will drive that. Part of it is the model that you're going with. If you're going with a traditional model, typically people would say you're going to go with a much larger business. From my own experience, I went more of the self-funded route, right? The business that I ended up closing on with my business partner is a business that would typically be in the fairway for traditional. EBITDA was roughly about 2.5 million. So there are creative ways that you can structure the deal. That just means you have to be negotiating a bit more, getting the seller to sit on some seller financing that's on standby. I know the SBA changed a couple of things recently, which might make that a bit difficult. But it's a question of what are you really targeting? I knew that when I was focusing on the search, I was trying to target on having middle management, right? I didn't want a scenario where I was buying a job. I wanted to make sure there was at least a solid middle management. That means that we had to buy a bit larger than what would be a typical self-funded, right? And then the other thing is the strategy. What's your strategy? If your strategy is going to be some type of roll-up, maybe you're starting off with a much smaller entity, and then you go focus on getting other smaller entities over time, right? So it's really one of those things where I'm not giving a direct answer to that, but then it's because you have to really have some introspection and decide what is it that you're really targeting, and that's going to inform the size of the business you want to go after.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, Fareed.
Yeah, I was curious if Tanasa could introduce himself, because I see quite a company.
Yeah, so we'll actually do. So I think I'm going to step off, and then Awais. So if you could do a brief introduction of yourself, and then Awais we have some questions we prepared for you.
Yeah, sure thing.
Just go through it.
All right. So my name is Tanasa Kamunga. If my name doesn't give it away, the accent will. I'm from Zimbabwe, Southern Africa. Moved to the U.S. sometime in 2004. Went to Lincoln University out of Pennsylvania for my undergrad. Pursued actuarial science, and after graduating, worked in the insurance industry for a couple of years, and I realized that math came easy, but I didn't enjoy that whole number crunching thing. At some point in time, I decided to run away from the insurance industry. Pivoted. I was still in a pricing type of a role, but pivoted outside the insurance industry. Worked at Republic Services as a pricing manager, second largest waste management company in the U.S. Was headhunted when I was there to go work with McKesson as a senior pricing manager. And around 2017, 2018, my wife and I launched a small startup called Elevator Creation, a travel backpack company. Some of you call it a diaper bag. I say it's a travel backpack because dads carry it too, right? And I think that was my exposure to entrepreneurship. I then just realized that, hey, listen, I got to find a way that I can step into more of that entrepreneurial realm in a much bigger way. Ended up deciding to pursue my MBA much later on in life, and got accepted to a couple of schools. Chose to go to a school that was one of my dream schools, which is the Wharton Business School. Being an Eagles fan, there's no other better place to be in than Philadelphia. For those of you that do know, the city is passionate about sports. And I didn't know about ETA. I didn't know about ETA, by the way. I'm not like some of you guys who probably knew about ETA before you went to business school. I found out because I took a class on accident. I was just trying to fill out my credits, right? So I took an ETA class and learned about ETA, and then that light bulb kind of went off, and it was off the races after that. I interned with a private equity over the summer in Dallas, which was founded and started by two individuals that had done a traditional search before they decided to launch their private equity. And I think that kind of cemented that I was going to go that route. Came back after the summer, decided to cut off all recruiting and start focusing on searching, and closed on a roofing and a sheet metal fabrication business in North Texas. So I'm in Sherman, Texas, about an hour north of downtown Dallas. And that business, so I'm fortunate enough that there were two businesses in one, right? So I was able to close the first deal where there were two businesses. One is roofing. Langford Roofing is the second oldest roofing company in the state of Texas, founded in 1937. And Metal Warehouse, which is a sheet metal fabrication shop. It's architectural metal, anything to do with, if you're from Texas, you know what bond dominiums are. If you're not, you go Google it, you'll find out. It's just like more like, it's pretty much homes that are made out of sheet metal, really. That's what bondos are. And yeah, that's pretty much it. So I've been operating for roughly about a year. Closed my deal on the 25th of April. We'll never forget that. It's a day that's kind of cemented in my head right now. To close that deal on the 25th of April, 2024. Took a little bit over, it was a bit over a year to kind of go through that whole after graduating and actually closing the deal. The deal died a couple of times, and I'm sure you'll hear that from a lot of people that when you're going through that whole deal process, sometimes the deal dies, and this deal died about 3-4 times before we actually closed it. And that's about it. I kind of went roundabout, but that's about it when it comes to my background.
No, thank you so much, Tanatsa. I think that's a good, transition point in kind of just going into the Q&A. And I wrote a few questions down that I think are going to be pretty useful for the crowd. So you talked about, the deal falling through. Like, what were other parts of the search process or just getting started that, you didn't anticipate? What are some of the obstacles that arose that came your way, whether if it was from the due diligence side, from the sourcing side? Can you kind of talk about that?
So what was kind of unexpected, I would say, and this is the biggest thing that I tend to highlight, the emotional roller coaster, man. You get the high highs, the low lows. At times I think people don't really talk a whole lot about that. So that was the most challenging part of it. That emotional roller coaster can be something. As far as the process, I mean, there are a lot of resources out there, right? So you expose yourself to a lot of the resources, but then there's certain elements that I wasn't too privy to, like how important it is to diligence the seller, because there's some shady people out there, right? Yeah, they run businesses, but then you'll find out when you start digging into some preliminary diligence that, they just sometimes doing that diligence on the seller is just as big as doing your quality of earnings or anything else, your legal diligence and all that. You just want to make sure you're dealing with someone who has some type of moral high ground, right? And they're just gonna do things the right way, because it minimizes there's always gonna be hair on any deal, but you don't want a deal that's so hairy that, that you can't really do and nothing about it, right? And a lot of that is tied to the seller. And I would say the other key thing is when you're sourcing those deals, it's like really courting some of the, because I went the route of being just broker focused. I didn't want to do a proprietary because again, I knew that I was going a self-funded route. I didn't want to spend too long in that pipeline or going through the process of closing a deal. So I just focused on a broker driven type of search. The way that I thought about it was, hey, listen, okay, I'm a car guy, right? So if I was going to go buy a car, I'm not going to walk around in the street and start asking every person with a car that I like, hey, do you want to sell your car? I just go to the dealership and I get it done. Same thing. I go to the broker. They already have prepared the seller, and that time period it would take me to close the deal, just shorten that time period. I took that into consideration as far as how important it was for me to actually start getting the experience of being on the other side operating and not spend like, too long just searching.
Thank you for that. In terms of just approaching valuation and negotiating with the seller, what was your strategy like that?
So valuation standpoint, I was trying to stay anywhere between like, I mean, obviously if I could get a 3x, that would have been amazing. But again, this was broker driven. Anywhere between like a 3x and I'll say a 5x. 5x was really like the top end, And the way I would look at it, and now that I'm on the other side, so I'm looking at it from two lenses, right? I'm looking at it from when I was searching, and I'll say, man, I got to stay within these parameters.
Yeah.
And now I'm on the other side, I'm realizing, well, price is only what you pay. Value is what you extract. You could pay 2x for a business. If you can't extract value, it doesn't matter that you pay 2x, right?
Right.
There has to be some value that you can extract out of that business, right? And so you might pay 4x for a business, but if that business has got significant value that you can extract, I would take that into consideration as well. You also don't want to overpay for a business, obviously, right? Because it'll make it difficult to then make those, because you're focusing on a very over leveraged type of a product here, right?
Right.
And if you're over leveraged, you still have to pay your debt. So there has to be a component where you're mitigating risk by either you could leverage, because again, one of the key things is that when somebody goes to the market, at times they're very unreasonable about what the business is worth, right? You might encounter where a business is they have this whole idea that they're going to get like 7x of in an industry where those 7x's don't exist. This is not a SaaS, right? A lot of businesses are not even going to touch that. So it's either you have to be prepared to sit down and have that conversation. If you're doing a proprietary, you're going to have to educate the seller. If there's a broker, you got to make sure that you tie yourself with brokers that know what they're doing, so that they're not over here given these expectations, right, to the seller to say, hey, you can sell your business for 10x, man. I've seen it before. And it doesn't really happen. And then now you have this difficult situation where you're walking down with the seller, right? So going back to the valuation standpoint, my approach was when I would see a deal that I do like, obviously you don't know the price up front, I would touch base with the broker, try to get a gauge off where they price at. Most of the time they don't want to tell you.
Yeah.
But if you do ask a lot of if you have the opportunity to meet with a seller, so the part of my other process was to try to, after my initial call with the brokers, I would try to fly in as soon as possible for a deal that I thought was something. I'll fly in as soon as possible to meet with the seller. When you meet with the seller, you learn a lot. And even when you ask, most of the sellers I would ask, like, hey, listen, what are you expecting? They would tell you off the rip. They'll tell you right there, like, hey, this is how much I'm expecting. Then you figure out whether they're realistic or not, right? And at the end of the day, the numbers are the numbers. You put that in the model. If you're able to get a return and you're able to service debt, again, if it's a self-funded type of a scenario, the business doesn't have to grow at a crazy rate, right? You could be growing at 8-10%, but then your value also comes from just paying off the debt, because the pressures are a little different. It differs depending on the model that you pick. Some models are going to force you to have a business that's growing super aggressive. If the business I'm running in a self-funded environment goes super aggressive, that's amazing. I just pay off the debt, or we get some distributions and return some money to investors. But then again, going back to the question of the valuation, the one thing you always want to think about is that price is only what you pay, value is what you extract. If you can't extract value, it doesn't matter that you're paying 1-2x.
Absolutely. I think we have a question here,
Yeah.
Sharif.
Thank you so much, Tanisi, for taking this, and also congrats on running the business for 1 year. The question that I have kind of relates to how long you've run the business. So as a searcher that's now running a business, do you have on PE ad or do you have on the founders ad? So, and are there moments where you think that you probably have to switch around to say, hey, I am the founder in this case, or like I'm just trying to extract value out of this business and get the hell out.
So I missed a portion of the question. I kind of caught the tail end. So if you could repeat the first part.
So the question was like, do you have on the ad as a PE fund or as a founder of the business? Or are there scenarios where you have to switch between both, where it's like sometimes you're so much engrossed that you're like, this has to work, or you're just like, hey, I'm just here to extract value. So whatever we need to trim to ensure that we get to the EBITDA numbers that we're looking at, that's what I want.
Got it. Well, one of the key things when I was doing the search is I wanted to get into a scenario where you're buying a business that is profitable for the long term, right? Again, if we get to a point that there's no like foresight for an exit in the horizon. I mean, if it does happen, we have to be getting a price that we cannot deny. So there's no pressure to exit, right? It's a bit different from that standpoint. There are investors that are in the minority, but then the way the deal was structured is in such a manner that we could easily get to year five, whether we have to refinance or base it off of the cash flows to buy out the minority investors if we had to get to that point where they need to exit. With regards to the value extraction component of it, obviously we definitely want to create value and extract some value. But it's not one of those where we're saying, hey, we're getting in here, we're going to chop everything so that it's a lean machine so that we get crazy profits. Not really. Now, the focus really is to build a solid business off of the foundation that's already existing. Again, it's a roofing company that's been around since 1937. We're not going to come here and try to gut it and kill such a legacy business, right? We want to ensure that we are extracting the value for investors, creating the wealth component for myself and my business partner, but then at the same point in time, also creating a very solid business for the long run. So the focus is really creating a solid business that can be cash flowing for the long term. If we get approached by some other strategic entity or say some PE fund wanted to acquire the business for a price that we can't deny, yeah, we'll take that into consideration. But the focus is not really like, hey, we need to be exiting in year 5 or year 6. That's not really the focus on the way we'll operate.
Yeah, question over here.
You spoke on investors. I know sometimes a lot of people try and put themselves in a position to look good towards investors, but what makes an investor look good towards you? You know, in a sense of like, what price point do you feel like they should get in at? Do you feel like, you know, sometimes, you know, you might not want to work with an investor that might be too scary or might be too shaky, you know, when it comes to certain things? Can you tell me like what are the key indicators of a good investor to you?
Oh man, okay. See, I learned that being on the other side. I think a lot of it just has to do with people's personalities, right? One of the key things is when depending on your deal structure and what you're focusing on. I was looking for patient capital, right? I'm not looking to say, hey, listen, this is a get rich quick. In year 4, we're gonna be exiting and we'll be all great, right? That wasn't the focus. So you have to have a good understanding of the characteristics of your investors. I think what makes a great investor is an investor that understands that, you know, M&A is not easy. Transitions are not easy. The whole concept of a J curve is there for a reason, right? A lot of entities experience that, and then, you know, then they start growing after that. If you have impatient capital and then you just hit a little bit of turbulence and they're ready to run for the hills, they'll create unnecessary pressure on your part. You're still operating. You have that responsibility to not only your employees, but the investors, right? So you definitely want to make sure that, you know, the investors are well aware that if you're looking for patient capital, that you have to put that out at the forefront when you meet with investors. The other key thing is that you want investors that kind of add value to your cap table. Not all of them, right? Because too many cooks could really spoil a meal, right? You don't want everybody to be in there talking about, hey man, I was an accountant. Can we go look at the books now? We don't need that, buddy. Let's slow down. What you really want is that you want investors that you can call on when you need to get advice in certain arenas, because you don't want to be a master of everything, right? And then you realize that there's certain things that you just do not have the capacity for. You're still operating the business, and that's really what the focus is. You want to dip into your network. Part of that is going to be your investors. So you have to take that into consideration, that those investors, what else are they willing to offer? And sometimes it might just be those investors that'll be quiet for the whole 5-6 years. You want some of them to be quiet and not everybody have their own opinion about where the company should be going, right? And at the same point, and the other thing is that when you are putting your cap table together, one of the key things that I would really focus on is that the investors are aligned with your vision, and you share your vision whether you're touching base with investors or when you're sharing your teasers and everything else. They have to understand what your vision is with the company that you're acquiring, or the companies that you want to acquire.
Got you. Thank you.
I have 2 questions. First one's real simple. Just wanted some clarification around the multiples you were using. You were saying usually between 2x to 5x. Was that EV to EBITDA, or was that like EV to revenue? I was curious more about the multiples you were using. And then the second part of my question is more so what these last 2 talked about around value creation. Of course, you want to come in and create value because you think of assets undervalued. You want to come in and create that additional value. But I'm assuming you have no background in roofing or sheets. I could be wrong on that, but you're coming into a business that you said was founded in 1937. So I'm curious if you could talk more about how you go about coming into a business that you're not familiar with, adding value to it, and like what we can learn while we're like here in business school to like learn those value creation tips that are kind of generally applicable. Because I'm assuming that you have generally applicable tips that can apply to all businesses, seeing your success.
All right, you had a couple of questions in there. Let's start with the first one. What was the first question?
Just the multiples that you're using. So like you were giving out multiples that you use, like which ones?
Oh yeah. So we talked about, let's do the multiples, and we'll jump into the other portion of not the background and everything else. So as far as multiples, if you can get a 2x, good luck to you. I haven't really seen a whole lot of that, right? Typically, what I see, and in the market that we're in, it's way more competitive as well. So 3.5x, 4x, 5x is actually a good deal. But at the end of the day, the way to think about it is that, can the numbers support the structure that you're presenting, right? You're going to have to pay off debt. You got to pay yourself a salary. There's a certain expectation from investors if you do have investors, right? If you don't have investors, maybe you have a certain return that you want to ensure that you're able to deliver, right? So based off of that will kind of tell you, because if you put your numbers in the model and 3.5x is not going to work, there's no need to try to do cartwheels with a deal to be able to get it done, right? And if it's a 4x and it works, hey, great. The cash flow is there. It's going to support it, because when you go to the bank and you want to get that debt, they will do their own diligence as well, right? They will dive in and tell you whether that debt service coverage ratio works or not. And with some of the newer things that are kind of coming back into SBA about if a seller note is in there, it has to be on standby for the entire term. I don't know whether any seller would really accept that, because when I closed the deal, the structure wasn't like that. As long as a seller note was on standby for I think 2 years, then they wouldn't consider it in the debt service coverage ratio. My understanding based off of the new structure is that now it has to be on full standby for the entire period, which is like 10 years, right? Which most sellers, I don't know. when they only consider, most of the time they really consider the money they're getting out of their close as it. After that, they're like, man, this is all up in the air. I don't know whether I'm ever going to get that, right? And then when it comes to like the experience, like the background, the roofing, for those that are familiar, especially when it comes to residential, there's a large component of roofing that's tied to insurance. My background was insurance. I wasn't really tied to like the quote unquote construction industry or the sheet metal fabrication. a lot of the skill set that you bring, and part of the reason why I knew I wanted to get a much larger entity, I wanted the subject matter experts to be there as part of the team. I didn't want to be the subject matter expert. Do I go on roofs? Yeah, only to just go see what the team is doing, but I don't spend my day on roofs, right? And most of the time, what I'm working on is over here in the office, I'm thinking on the bigger strategic picture or fighting fires, which there are a lot of fires, trust me. So some of those will keep you in the office for the entire day. And as far as sheet metal fabrication, no, didn't know anything about sheet metal fabrication. I've been learning a lot in the last year or so. And based off of what I've learned, man, I've fallen in love with manufacturing. And when a lot of people talk about searching, manufacturing is one of those things that people are like, I don't want to touch that. It's CapEx heavy. But then there's another side of manufacturing. When I look at it, I realize, oh, wait a minute. Manufacturing is one of those like, steady Eddie type of businesses. You kind of have an idea what your revenue is going to look like. Your margins might not be as great as, say, a service business like roofing, but then it gives that stability. You know what to expect. What you have to focus on is on scaling. Your margins are what they are. Yeah, you could kind of negotiate partnerships and everything else from your vendors to try to manage your COGS, but then it's heavily predictable. So a lot of what you are bringing from a value standpoint is the big picture thinking, right? A lot of individuals who start these businesses are either family businesses. They are great entrepreneurs, but then at the same point in time, when they get to a certain scale, the value that they could bring or extract, it hits a cap, whether it's because they don't have the knowledge base or it's more a scenario where, I mean, come on, if somebody's taking home about $1.9 million and they initially started that business bringing home about a couple of $100,000, they might have just hit a point where they're like, hey, man, I'm making enough money to be okay. I don't want to keep on pushing this thing.
You spoke on a market that you were previously interested in. If you could go back now, what would probably be your dream market to pursue as far as ETA goes?
As in what, an industry?
Industry. I know you're in roofing now, but like if you
Oh.
say you're in love with manufacturing, what
Yeah.
streamline or what industry would you look into now, as far as acquisitions?
So the way I look at it, I don't think it's more of industry. I think it's more of a business because there are profitable businesses in every industry, even in industries that people would claim are kind of dying, like printing and everything else. They're profitable businesses. And I think what has me falling in love with manufacturing is because of the business I bought. The fundamentals are very solid, right? And then because I'm experiencing that, because if I was experiencing something totally different, I'll be here telling a different story, right? So I think it has to do more with the business than the industry itself, per se, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes sense. Thank you.
Man, really appreciate you coming in today. Question for me is, when you were thinking about your search, and apologies if you said this earlier, how did you think about matching like your prior experience, your innate skill set with the type of business that you actually wanted to buy? Or were you were just thinking about the numbers?
I didn't think about that. If I'm to be honest, no. I was like, because here's the thing. I was sitting in a place where I was like, business is business, right? I want a business that makes money. If I was gonna buy like a lemonade stand that makes money, I was gonna do it, right? It was really based off of trying to buy a business that is profitable and then bring whatever skill set that I do have to that business, right? Because from my background, even though I was in a heavy number crunching background, where I kind of saw my muscle when I was working in corporate was that I was more of an operations focused guy. That's where I would get most of my upside, right? That's where I would get like a lot of those great reviews where I was focused. Yeah, I would look at the numbers. Yeah, the numbers came easy, but then I would focus a lot on the operations. And operations is in almost any business you can think about, right? It's just about setting a strategy and then thinking about the human element which drives a lot of businesses, right?
Tanata, thank you so much for taking the time.
The one thing I wish I could see everybody in the room over here. I feel like I'm on a big screen and everybody looking at me. I wish I could see and identify people over here. It would have been amazing, but
you look good, man. You look good.
Technology. I look like a roofer, man.
No, you look good, man. So Tanasi, you touched on, a lot of the diligence process, the searching process, but I was curious in terms of post when you close and then you're transitioning from a searcher, now you're an operator. How did you establish credibility with this team that, now that you wear that hat, and you have to do the operational side of things?
That's a heavy question, my guy. It's a heavy question because there were a couple of things I guess I would go into what I was concerned about as you get excited when you close a deal, right? You're excited. Oh man, we done it. You sign on that. Oh, there you go. I see people.
I just figured it out.
Yeah. So you get excited, right? When you close a deal, you sign on the dotted line and everything else. Then you realize, oh, wait a minute. I'm actually going to walk into the room and be introduced as a new guy, right? So I had a couple of things I was concerned about. One, I'm a brother, clearly. I'm coming over here to a very small town where there are not a lot of minorities. Again, I mean, there are some, but not a whole lot. And then the other thing, the accent gives me away. You could tell the moment you hear me, you're like, this guy's not from here. Where's he from, right? So I was a little concerned about those two things. But then I spoke to the seller before that, I earmarked, because I got to a point where I was having lunch with the seller right around the time when we closed the deal, because I moved to Sherman so January 2024, and we closed the deal in April because the deal died one more time when I was already in town. Like I'd already moved here and the deal died one more time, the most stressful time of that deal process. And I was having lunch with the seller, and the point when I knew that where the deal was going to close, everything was on the table. I asked him, like, hey, listen, I'm a little concerned that, it's a small town, and you could tell, like, just by looking, I look nothing like anybody around here. I'm a bit concerned about what that transition period is going to be like. And he said something that rang really true, right? He was like, hey, listen, here's the reality of it. One, the good people anywhere, and then you're gonna find some shady people anywhere you go. Your focus should really be just be yourself. People like authenticity, right? They like you to be who you are, to be the genuine person that you are. And then the other thing that the biggest piece of advice that he gave me even before I moved out here, I almost made a big mistake. A lot of these small towns, they don't like it. It's not. It has to do more with like they don't like the unknown. People that don't live amongst them, it's kind of like, don't come here, right? And I almost made the big mistake where the broker would say, hey, listen, you got kids. You could live like closer to Dallas. It's only a 30-minute drive from McKinney. So you could live in McKinney and just drive every day to come to the business. That would have been a bad move because now that I live here, I understand that the message I would have sent to the team working here and even some of the customers who know who's running the business is that, hey, listen, I want to make money with you small town people, but I can't live amongst you, right? So just being local and living here made my transition a little easier. But then the day when I was introduced there were shocked faces in the warehouse. I remember that I told the seller to say, hey, listen, whatever you do, don't mention I graduated from Wharton because I know what that will mean. It will mean that PE is here to cut people. That's what people just hear, right? So I told him, hey, don't mention none of that, and just say, hey, I brought a new partner. That didn't last. It was like the first thing he said was like, hey, I brought in a new partner. Well, he remembered the partner part, but he was like, brought in a new partner, college educated who graduated from Wharton. I was like, oh, here we go. And then by the afternoon, I was walking in the shop, and the shop. So we have a shop manager. Yeah, I mean, it was kind of jokingly, but I knew that to every joke there's an element of truth. And he asked me, hey, my job is safe, right? I was like, wait a minute, where's this coming from? We're actually looking to grow over here. I mean, the transition part had some turbulence, and I can get into that a little later on as to some of the challenges that happened during the transition. I want to make sure that I'm not taking too much of the airspace over here because I know you guys have got some questions you might want to direct. But if we have more time, I'll go into some of the turbulent issues that we hit during the transition, which made it a bit interesting,
Yeah, if you could touch on that, that's actually my next question is that
All right.
transition phase,
So when we closed the deal, this is crazy. So the guy who bought the business from Steve, he's not a computer guy, you know, old school papers everywhere. You know what I mean? I'm more of I want to see stuff on the computer screen, right? Just different schools of thought. And I'm a numbers person again, because numbers come easy. So I like seeing data, you know, just so that I can at least make some decisions. So what we did notice was that we were getting a lot of calls, right, for the roofing side of the business. But for some reason, it wasn't equating to the leads that were being allocated to the team. So what tends to happen over here is that we got a receptionist that answers all the calls, and we got a rotating schedule for all the sales guys so that they get leads that are coming in from either calls coming to the office or the advertising that we do. We sponsor the weather on Channel 12 over here in Sherman. So every time the news is about to start, it's the weather sponsored by Langford Roofing, blah, 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 right? So we get a lot of leads from that as well. But we're noticing that the numbers were not really jiving, right? Something was wrong over there. And then digging into those numbers, what we ended up, without getting too much into detail, what we ended up discovering is there were two sales guys who had been trying to start their own little roofing company on the side, like months before we even closed the deal. So they're over there trying to start their own little roofing using the leads from the company. Well, they got unlucky that the company was sold, and I was digging into a lot of that. So we caught them like within about a month. And when we started digging into it, they were doing it for a long time, and he didn't catch it because he wasn't really looking at it. He knew something wasn't right, though. That's the thing about a lot of these entrepreneurs, right? They got this sixth sense, because he told me about it over lunch that something is not right, and I know it, but I cannot put a finger on it. And once we kind of started digging into the numbers, and how we really caught them was that again, having one of those companies that has a good reputation in the community, they went to bid on one big house. And I guess he saw the big roof. He was like, man, I'm going to make a lot of money. And that house he bid on was one of those generational type of customers where the great grandfather used to get their roof done by Langford. And he bid on it with his own card of the company that he was trying to start. And that customer came into the shop and said, hey, I knew you guys were trying to figure what was going on. Here it goes. I got your evidence right there. So that was a bit of turbulence that we hit around the time when we had the transition. But that was probably the worst that was probably the worst of it, because after we got rid of those individuals, on the middleware side of the business, we didn't deal with as much. The only other thing was more of incompetence rather than anything else. We had a bookkeeper that, I don't know whether bookkeeping was his thing or he was over there just adding numbers and whatever, like, hey, man, let's just get it done. So I'm not an accounting expert, but man, I could tell when numbers don't look right? And but then that one was not a contentious scenario. I think it was one of those things where there wasn't a situation where there was accountability for certain things. Nobody was ever double checking, but I was coming from a totally different background, and I was looking into the numbers and everything. I say, hey, wait a minute, how are you? My brother, you understand what accrual is? This doesn't look like accrual to me, but it was just one of those things.
Okay, great. Hey, can you see us?
Yeah, I can see you guys, but man, y'all look like ants over there, man. I wish the thing was zoom into whoever's talking, because I can tell I can see people in the room, but then I can't really tell who's talking right now.
I'll speak up. Lane Grooms again. Thank you again for joining. And I noticed as you talk more, I'm noticing that you've picked up somewhat of a Texas accent. So shout out to you.
Oh no, man, ain't no Texas accent out here, bro.
So my question is around, and I know you talked about the horizons, the communication that you give to investors as far as like their exit strategy, just being patient and seeing that value grow over time. But I'm more curious about your personal exit plan. So you coming into this, you're all hands on deck now. It seems like this is where all of your time's going. But are you looking at it personally like, hey, there's going to be a point where I transition, maybe ramp down like 50% and start looking for the next acquisition, like, or are you I got kind of your personal exit plan around this?
Yeah. So personally, on my end, at some point in time, when I have the ship moving in the direction that I wanted to move in, and that's part of why I wanted that middle management where you get a GM. Well, I do have a GM that operates that oversees both Langford and the middle warehouse, right? The long-term strategy is to then start focusing on either I mean, obviously, number one is focusing on organic growth, but then you also want to focus on, I want to also focus on the inorganic growth, right? Where we strategically acquire some of those assets as we move along. What that will require is that at some point in time, I won't be sitting in this helm as the day-to-day operator, right? The GM is going to have to be promoted into a position where they have more responsibility, where they're able to steer the ship, so that I can continue focusing on just acquiring other businesses down the road and growing. I know everybody has this dream of a holdco. Yeah, I'm dreaming too, man. I'm dreaming too. So maybe at some point in time, that's really what the focus is. And I'm someone who's very passionate about where I'm from, Zimbabwe. So at some point in time, I also want to be acquiring businesses on the motherland, right? The opportunity every time I go home, I see opportunities over there. I see like an open field of opportunities on the continent. As long as you got the capital, I guess. If I could figure that portion out of, okay, getting that cheap capital, yeah, I want to continue doing this, not just over here in the US, but pushing it even on the motherland.
Okay, great. I think that's all we had. Thank you. And now we have
So we have another speaker who's joining us. Tanatsa just successfully closed on his search, but we have someone who's in the middle of the journey. Jana, thank you so much for joining us. Can you just kind of talk about briefly yourself, let the audience get a background information?
You have to change the screen.
Can't hear you.
Remember how you brought the second screen open?
I think you're on mute, Jana.
Can you hear me now?
Yep, now we can hear you.
Yeah, we can hear you. Thank you so much for joining us.
Perfect. Thank you so much for having me. And thank you for your patience with me joining this event. So my background is when I graduated with my undergraduate degree, I joined an accounting firm where I started as a small business, as an office assistant, and I worked myself up to becoming a small business financial and tax advisor. And then in 2022, I decided to go back to school, and I did my MBA at Babson, which is quite close to where I live right now. I live in New Hampshire. So as I was going through my MBA, I was thinking what are the next steps. I was interested in startups, and then I was introduced at one point to an ETA concept, and I fell in love with the whole ETA concept because my background was accounting. That's the customers that I work with were small businesses, so I understood that portion. So then once I graduated, I eventually started searching for a company to acquire. And right now I've been searching now for a year and a half, and I'm under an LOI, hoping to close on this acquisition hopefully soon, within the next 30 days.
Awesome. So, Jana, what really motivated you to pursue an ETA at this point in your career? Like, what was really the reason behind this?
I think I would say it was the challenge. I was definitely excited about, it has so many moving concepts, and I just was really in awe about how much you can accomplish if you actually align your acquisition target with your skill set and where it can lead. I mean, it obviously has a lot of high risk, high reward. And I was really attracted to that reward part of it. I have also kind of dipped my fingers a little bit in a startup and tried to do something over there. And I just found the ETA concept to be so much better aligned with my skill set and where I was going. So, and that's basically why ETA won.
Awesome. And when you decided to, go down that path, how did you decide to structure your search? Were you going the traditional route? Are you going self-funded? Can you kind of like talk about that aspect?
Yes. So I definitely gave it some thought what would be the better way to do a traditional or do a self-funded. And I think specifically in the beginning, I was still kind of working on my startup and I was working an ETA concept and I was kind of trying to explore both option and I wasn't really ready to commit to either one of those concepts. And I mistakenly thought that I can, maybe perhaps do it all. And, it was soon enough became fairly obvious that if I really wanted to move the needle in any meaningful way on either one of these concepts, I was going to have to make the decision to go either one way or another. And that's how I ended up with an ETA. I really kind of, thought about where my skill set was and where it aligned the best. So I decided to go to the ETA route, but I did knew that just raising money, traditional fund just wasn't for me. I didn't feel it was flexible enough. I perhaps, looking back, would say maybe I should have I wish I spoke to more traditional search fund investors than I did. I did spoke to some, but I wish I spoke to more. I do think I would have ended up going self-funded either way because it just attracts me more. But looking back, I feel like that's probably what I should have done.
And I think it's more common. It's not really easy to raise capital. I think, especially right now, with all the liquidity crunch, it's been very hard, not just for new searchers, but even some of, your well-established private equity firms. So, and that's kind of one of the reasons why we decided to go down that route as well, so accessing SBA. But thank you so much, Anna. How, like, in terms of your daily search workflow, what does that look like? When you're at this point in your search, what type of, I guess, businesses are you screening for? How are you doing that? Can you kind of talk about, your selection criteria?
Yes. So it was fairly early. Into the research, I realized that in order to make meaningful progress, I need to be able to make these decisions quickly. I need to be able to decide if this acquisition is aligned with what I want. And outside of the financial aspect, before you deep dive into the numbers, I really realized that you have to the package the sellers are gonna present to you is always gonna look different. There's one business owner is gonna have this, the next one is gonna have this. So you can't just simply rely on the financial data, and it's easier to make this decision quick. It's easier and quicker if it just kind of aligns with overall your thesis. So my thesis was I wanted a business that was boring as possible. I wanted a business that was selling to another business. I also wanted a business where a business owner was willing to extend a seller note. And my last criteria was that I wanted a business owner that was going to retire. And that was the reason why he was selling. So basically, this kind of gave me a good concept in terms of being quick at the rejecting or looking at the deal and saying, okay, this is not for me because of this reason.
Yeah.
I knew I wanted to stay in New England, so I had no industry thesis at all. I felt my financial background was kind of transferable in terms of what I can do in a different industries. Obviously, if it was something heavily licensed or anything like that, I was out of the question. But that was kind of that initial thought process for my review. And then, obviously, I did deep dive into the numbers, but that portion can be somehow, I wouldn't say it's challenging, but it was challenging in terms of the fact that you are making these whole set of assumptions about projecting something, and you are like, okay, well, I'm making all these assumptions, and then you need to be aware that they are just assumptions, that you can't pencil something down into a realistic projection yet. It's not even feasible, really.
So I'm kind of curious, having a accounting background, how, like, I guess, has there been any red flags that that you can kind of talk about that you've come across during your search?
So I would say, despite my financial background, I am a firm believer that there is so much to learn about the business that is in between the lines that you're gonna read in between the lines. And especially when it comes to the numbers, they are not black and white. There is so much gray area that you need to take into the consideration, especially with the small business owners. They tend to be focused, number one, on reducing their tax liability. So you can be looking at a certain lines on their financial statements or perhaps on a tax returns, and they don't really show the real picture. But that doesn't mean that the business it's not profitable. So really, my focus is always from the beginning, try to read between the lines on what is the business owner saying. So usually when I meet with somebody initially, if I say, okay, I want to talk to this person further, it's oftentimes in terms of questions like what keeps you up at night, if you would be my age, what you would be doing with this company, stuff like that is very light-hearted, but because it allows them to speak on what's on their mind when it comes to their business, because most business owners, in my experience, they don't per se look at their financial statements like somebody like we would, really. So that's what really where I steer the conversation oftentimes. And in terms of red flags, again, it comes down not to the numbers. I had this one business that I looked at, it was about a year ago, and it was, actually, they were very, on a paper, they looked good. It was a B2D. They were selling product, they were selling sunglasses to basically large, like Walmart, or I don't think they were in Target, but basically that was their kind of point of selling to the distributors. And on a paper, they were really good, and I had a good conversation with the owner, and I liked a lot about the setup, about the way he was doing things. He seemed transparent with his employees. When I first visited his office, one of his employees was there, and she could overhear our conversation. And there was something that just didn't sound right to me, because he had plans what he was gonna do after he retires, which is kind of like a good check. If people are just trying to see how much you are willing to pay, or actually like people that tend to have plans in their head what they're gonna do after they retire, be something simple. Those people tend to be more aligned with wanting to sell. So he had these plans, and I felt that it was good. There was one thing that just didn't sound right to me. He kept asking me, he kept reaching out. He asked me when would I think I would be able to make a decision if I would like to extend him an offer. And then he also followed up if I was ready to make an offer. And it just didn't sit well with me that he was asking this way. It's really a patience game. You can't be pressuring either side. Each side has their own due diligence to do before they move forward. And then I said, I basically said, I'm not ready to make this decision right now. And if this is what matters for you, understandable, you gotta go your way, I'm gonna go my way. And then afterwards, several months later, I learned that one of his biggest customers was basically Bye Bye Baby, which, as you are aware, Bed Bath & Beyond owned them, and they went out of business in bankruptcy. And that is why he was trying to be so quick with the sale, because he knew things were coming down and he was going to lose that customer. So really, again, if I just went based on the paper, I probably, I would have never, I might have never discovered this. But just that feeling that tells you that there is something is off, I think that's even more valuable than anything that you can find on a piece of paper.
Absolutely. Yeah, we have some questions from the crowd. Great.
Thanks, Yana, for being with us today. Just a brief question. You said you were industry agnostic. So when you found the company that you want to invest in, say it was in an industry that you're like really not familiar with, how do you structure your studying process to learn more about the industry, and how long did it take you to understand? Like I heard you, first you looked at sunglasses company, second you looked at some other company. Like how long did it take you to understand and actually speak on the same terms with the founder to actually feel confident that, okay, now I understand this business, now I can move forward?
Yeah, I don't. I honestly don't. Even to this, even the business that I'm under an LOI right now, I don't. And I make it very clear. That's part of the reason why I specifically look for the business owner that wants to retire, because I know that there is a lot of things that I know. I know a lot of things about finance. I can look at the financial statements and make fairly quickly some assumptions and just build off on that. But in terms of the business, there's a lot that I don't know, and I want them to teach me. I don't. So, and I tell them that as well when they ask me, like, what do you know about this? I basically tell them that I know nothing.
Can I chime in real quick? I think what Janet kind of highlighted is what I mentioned earlier, that you really want to diligence your seller because they're profitable businesses in many industries, right? And if your seller is a very transparent and honest individual, they will be transparent about even their books. They say, hey, this is profitable. The taxes might look a little weird, but the reason why they look like this is because I don't want to pay taxes, so I do this, and that, right? So one of the key things you really want to dig into, especially if you go the self-funded route, the more filters you put, the less deals you're going to see. If you say, I only want to look at this industry, you're not going to see a whole lot of deals. You got to open up, because there are a lot of profitable industries and a lot of profitable businesses out there that you might not have an idea of, right? If I'd focus on what I understood and said, hey, listen, I only want to buy these insurance businesses because I worked in insurance. I'm going to buy an insurance brokerage type of business. I would not have noticed everything else that was out there. So you want to open up your eyes to a whole lot of deals and know why you don't like certain deals, because every deal you look at is going to be a learning lesson. You're going to see certain deals and realize this is the reason why this deal doesn't work. And you're going to look at certain deals and say, okay, this is the reason why this works. So I wouldn't put too much of an industry filter. I would keep it open. Then you kind of narrow it as you go through the process.
And that's actually that's a really good summary, and because there is so many industries that you don't even know about that exist. So go ahead.
I think that was
Grace, can you mute yourself?
I was going to add
Sorry, go ahead.
one thing to that. The reason why industry theses exist, in my opinion, this is just my opinion. When you look at a capital, in terms of capital, everybody evaluates risks, right? When they are handing out capital, and traditional search fund investors want thesis. And the reason why they want thesis, because they assume that when you pick a thesis in an industry, you start learning about the industry, you start be able to due diligence your deals better. And eventually you end up, getting understanding the space and finding the deal that works for them, but you understand the industry. So they want the industry thesis because they believe that's how they mitigate some of the risk with the searcher not, post-close struggling, because they don't like the seller staying on at all. They want clean cut and be like, okay, now you're on your own. So there is oftentimes some of the things that you see specifically will apply to self-funded or traditional for a reason. And for example, that industry thesis still exists. Even within self-funded, it's a little bit more bigger, or like a little bit not as much defined. But even if you decide to fund your deal with SBA, SBA has this rule that says one of their rules is that you have to have a prior experience in that industry, but that rule is also quite flexible. So it comes down to you selling yourself and saying you can do this, and then finding the bank that believes that you can do it. So if you feel more comfortable in that space and you say, I want this industry that does make sense, it's gonna be, regardless what you pick, you're gonna have to eventually sell it to somebody to give you the capital for it.
Great. Yeah. Thank you so much, Jonah. I just had one last question for each of you. Tanatsa and Jonah, so what is one piece of advice, key takeaway that you would give Jonah, you as a current searcher, and Tanatsa, you as exiting, to new searchers as they go about the process?
Go ahead.
I was about to say ladies first.
Thank you. I would probably say, if I have to give one piece of an advice, is the main difference between that ETA has no, unlike like startups, there is no this fancy life surrounding search funds. And VC gets all this glory. And one of the challenges that I have experienced in my search was that there is only so many people that you can talk to. Most people you can talk to, but they don't understand what are you saying. And they also have no advice for you. So having somebody in your life that you can just be like, okay, this is my challenge right now, and they understand what you are saying, and they even might be able to offer some advice that is valuable. I think that's very, very important. And it can get very tough when you are searching, when deals don't go through, when you have something on your mind. How am I gonna deal with this? No deal is the same. There is always, it's a chess, it's a game of chess when you have to keep waiting for people to respond to you. And that can get very challenging. So having somebody in your life, be it a different searcher or in somebody in your space that will understand what are you going through, and not just listen, because I'm sure many of us have people in their life that will listen to their challenges, but being able to offer that feedback and say quickly, without anything like, have you considered this? Did you think about that? What about this? that's invaluable.
Great, thank you.
Uh,
Tanata.
Yeah, it's kind of almost in the same vein. I think the one thing that I would probably give is that, manage your stress well. I know when I was searching, and even when you're now operating, you're gonna have to figure that out as well, because that comes with a different beast as well, right? Just because you close a deal doesn't mean that some of the challenges that you will face kind of go away. When I was searching, I was working out a lot just to take my mind off of, that emotional roller coaster that I was talking about. So you want to find like a very healthy and productive way to manage your stress. But at the end of the day, what I would say that even in that scenario where you're concerned about your deal and everything else and you're managing the stress, what is the worst case scenario? Because now I'm asking myself that I know some people might say, well, he's saying that because he closed a deal. But then the reality is that the worst case scenario is that your situation right now would be the same situation if you didn't close a deal. You're going to go look for a job. So it's not that bad, right? Even the worst case scenario of it all, it's really not that bad. So, when you're going through it, enjoy the process. Because I know there were times when I was getting too stressed about, closing a deal, and I wasn't enjoying every aspect of the process. And then there's certain elements that I'm like, man, I wish I had taken time to really take that in. Like, hey, this is me. I'm doing this. I'm actually sitting down and negotiating and convincing the bank to give me all this money when I don't have anything in my bank account. It's like, yeah, so just enjoy the process, manage your stress well, and just know that, even the worst case scenario, you're going to be all right.
Okay, great. Well, thank you both so much. Is there the name of your guys' firms or some contact information, and we can kind of spread that out, and if anyone wants to reach out to you guys.
Yeah, I'm focusing on the P&L, man. I'll put my email out for $5 each contact. No, I think y'all got you got my email address for
Okay.
those that want to reach out. Feel free to share with them. Yeah.
Okay, great. All right. Thank you guys both so much. Taking the time. Appreciate you both.
Of course. Thanks for having
Thank you. Appreciate it.
and enjoy the rest of your day. Bye.